I'm going to, hand it off to you in a second. I was hoping to just kind of check back with you on kind of the work that you've been doing at Remitly and what you've learned over the last year, what you're seeing really on the ground with regard to how the pandemic has been impacting the employees of Remitly, and particularly, again, the parents, but also younger generation and folks who I think, we talked about almost like three personas. So there's the parents who have, the kids at home. We have, the younger persona who's now like very isolated. And then maybe you have the parents who now have their younger kids living, not younger kids, but their adult children living at home. And it's stressful kind of for all three of those. So, what you're seeing, and then, what steps is Remitly taking to really support employees? And, we'll definitely dive more into all of that in the Q&A, but we always love to be actionable. So great to hear some examples from you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come back and share some of our lessons learned over the course of this last year, and really how all of this really intersects with the work around DEI and how we think about our employees and what that overlay of mental health really plays into that aspect around it. I think as we looked through this last year and as I reflect on, the combination of moving into a forced remote work environment through a pandemic, while there were global socio-political impacts happening all over the world, because while we were very centered and focused on so many of the things that were happening in the US, but to be reminded, because as a global company that we are, we have employees that are in Nicaragua and the Philippines and all over Europe. And in Nicaragua, they were impacted by massive storms, and the government to this day still hasn't acknowledged the fact that COVID exists, right? So many private companies that have locations in Nicaragua, for example, were left to our own devices to really figure out how do we support and create safety for our employees during a pandemic. And then another example is in Poland, which is another place where we have a large footprint of employees, as well as major rallies and protests happened around women's right to choose, right? And so how do we get our employees activated and engaged, and how do we continue to support them as they're navigating all these things that are happening for them outside of what's happening in this little square that we all see each other in every day, right? And so in terms of just shifting, thinking through the what, when, where, why, how of how we connect and communicate with our employees, the how piece of kind of really thinking through and having regular engagements with our different populations of employees, specifically like with parents, having those connect sessions with them to find out what their needs are in the moment and continuing to shift them as things shifted throughout the year. So in that, we ended up bringing in a parent teacher coach to really help parents figure out how to teach at all, right? Because most parents don't teach, right? They're not necessarily teachers, but then also teaching remotely in an environment where their schools weren't set up for it as well. So being able to provide them that resource and one-on-one hours with a coach to help them with just how to teach and navigate. And then, expanding our flex work options for parents throughout the year as well. And then bringing in and instilling 3 or 4 day holiday weekends for employees across the globe at least once a month, so that everyone was consistently taking those wellness days off together, so nobody felt like they were feeling like they couldn't take time off because everybody else was still working. So having that forcing feature of saying everybody's off, for this 1 or 2 days a month, really, I think helped everybody take those breathers when they needed. And we've been continuing that practice since COVID started. Also, when you think about the when, we learned really quickly about the immediacy of being able to communicate out information, even when we had limited information, to be able to respond. That response time was incredibly critical, especially for our younger employees who really needed those spaces for community to, one, either have that support space together to grieve, to feel their anger, to feel their frustration for the things that were going on throughout the year, and then being able to then flip and turn around and be able to develop workshops for all employees, regardless of their kind of home status, of how do they engage in what was happening around BLM last summer, or what just recently happened and continues to happen within our Asian communities around the US. And so really trying to create those spaces for our employees to be able to engage So that shifted very quickly for us, and we've learned a routine around how to do that and respond in a really proactive way. And then the what, in terms of just kind of really understanding the transparency of the business and the vulnerability of the leadership team has really shifted and changed, right? So if we weren't already there before, we surely are now, right? Where our leaders of our organization, are challenging themselves to be more open and share kind of where they're at in terms of what's happening in the world, and being able to engage in those dialogues, check in with their people managers to say, hey, like, what resources do you need so you can support your teams? Which leads to what I've learned and we've learned over the course of the year of people managers more than ever are really becoming that critical touch point for so many of our employees, because for many of them, it is their only touch point to the rest of the organization and the resources that they needed. So really, we've had to shift the way we support people managers and making sure that they're equipped with the tools and resources to be able to say, hey, here's what tools and resources are available to you. Here's what it's like to onboard with the organization and connect them to the rest of the organization to really feel like they have a sense of belonging and connection to our cultural values as an organization. And really, all of these things really tie together, I think, especially for us as a company at Remitly, because we're a remittances company and because of who we serve, which are immigrants all over the globe who are sending money home to their families. During this last year, our customers were directly impacted by the fact that they didn't have access to physical spaces to be able to go and send money home, which then, they had to seek out digital options like ours to be able to send that money home. But also the source of the money that they have in order to send money home are impacted because of the fact that many of our customers are service workers or in essential jobs. And so many of those different factors really kind of kept that why together to really start to shift and change the way that we thought about those pieces. And in terms of how we really expanded our mental health services to really support them, one of the big kind of key pieces that we launched in 2020, right before COVID hit, was our partnership with Modern Health, which helped us provide all of our employees, on top of our benefits, 6 coaching and 6 counseling sessions. And just this year, we expanded that partnership to be able to offer those 6 coaching and 6 counseling sessions to dependents within their household as well. So really expanding that service and making it available for all of our employees and their families across all of our locations globally. And then we continue to offer informal resource connection points, which we created earlier last year. We used to call them Wellness Wednesdays, where it was basically a peer support group for employees to have those opportunities to check in with one another. And that was especially meaningful for those employees who are living at home on their own and away from their families. And then providing those open spaces for connection and dialogue through all of our employee resource groups. Our Slack communication channels for the employee resource groups really became a super active space for employees to be able to connect and exchange resources, especially for our parents. When COVID hit, many of them were able to kind of bring all those things together. And then I have some other pieces of resources here that are shared, but we can move on to the next slide. So one of the things that was super duper helpful with our partnership with Modern Health was being able to have access to data and to be able to really take a look at our workforce and understand like where their needs are and how do we start to shift that based on the resources and the benefits we need to be able to provide to them. And so being able to have this partnership and being able to kind of dig into how our employees are using the resources, of course, like, all up aggregate, so we don't know who's using the resources, but it does give us a good sense of how do we support our employees, which managers seem to be struggling to support their teams. And so it helps us be able to reallocate our energy to the places that need it most in the organization. And then the next slide, oh, or not, that's it.